which I had to do a little bit of research myself to find out that MDRC originally stood for Manpower Demonstration Research Corporation, which has just been shortened to MDRC. So no need for you to learn any that it's an acronym because it is just the name of the company. They do research across the United States. And most recently, they did some research looking at the Sequences to Success in Washington State project, which used sequence analysis and state longitudinal data to map the post-secondary pathways of Washington high school graduates. Um, we're excited to have them and to learn about the work that they've been doing. We've got three members of their organization. Britt Henderson is a research associate. Annabelle Utz is a research analyst, and Betsy Tessler is a senior associate with MDRC. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I think turn it over to Britt and um, let you take over. Also, we will be doing a Q&A at the end, and opportunities for questions will occur during the presentation. So Britt, the floor is all yours.
All right. Thanks so much, John. And hey, everyone. Really grateful to be here. Also, want to highlight my other colleague, Casey Dean, who I believe is on the call, and she is representing the Washington Student Achievement Council, which is our collaborator on this project. All right. So getting into it. So our project is called Sequences to Success in Washington State. And the goal of that project is mapping students' high school to work pathways in the state of Washington. So before we get into the findings, I remember growing up, this was kind of the prevailing narrative that I heard that you graduate from high school, you go to college, and then somehow magically you get into the workforce and have this great career and you're successful. And I'm just wondering, did anybody else kind of get sold this narrative growing up? Maybe like a quick show of hands or thumbs up if anybody else. Yeah, I see some nods, thumbs up. Okay. Yeah, and so that is kind of what a lot of us are told, and it's a very simple linear process. But when you really think of what young people today are facing, it looks a bit more like this. You're seeing an increase in complexity in terms of the options that students face when they graduate from high school. So you have things like dual enrollment, which can potentially shorten time in college. You also have apprenticeships. You have shorter term options. So students, a lot more students are going into the community and technical college space and exploring things like certificates. And then to make it even more complicated, you've got a lot of non-credit options that are out there too. And so no longer is it this straightforward process of you go to college, get a good job, and you're set for life. It's a lot of decision work that goes into just making that first step of like, what do I even do coming out of high school? And so recognizing that, MDRC collaborated with the Washington Student Achievement Council, WASAC, and also the Washington State Education Research and Data Center, ERDC. And we wanted to explore several different questions that deal with this school to work transition that young people face. And this is just a few that we're going to talk about today. So one, what are the most common pathways that students take after high school? What types of labor market outcomes, and you can think about earnings or percent employed are attached to each of these pathways. And then getting into the perspectives of the students themselves, how are they describing their experiences? So to do this work, we use something called sequence analysis, which is this really cool method where you can map out the trajectories of every graduate in the class of 2017. So we had almost 64,000 high school seniors who attended public high schools in Washington State. And so we literally map out the trajectories of each of those students at the quarterly level. So whether they are in a community college, working in a four-year institution, et cetera. And then we use cluster analysis to let the data kind of surface what are the most common pathways. Importantly, we pair this quantitative analyses with qualitative interviews. And so in our first round, we interviewed about 13 people who were relatively recent graduates from Washington State high schools, and we wanted to understand again, their experiences navigating their own transitions. We wanted to know about challenges that they face, and then also sources of support. And so I just want to highlight up front some of the things that we learned, and then throughout the presentation, we'll get into more detail. But first off, the analyses surface 12 key pathways. And so it just provides evidence that things really are more complicated and more complex for students. And it's no longer that high school, getting a bachelor, and then exactly 4 years, and then launching into a successful career. There's a lot more happening, and the majority of students are actually not following that route. Um, as many of you know, WASAC in Washington State has a credential attainment goal of 70% of adults. And I think it's like age 25 to 64, 44. I might have that wrong. But so thinking about that credential attainment goal, there's a large group of students who are exploring college, they're racking up credits, but they're stopping out before they get a credential. And that could be a very important group to follow and explore in terms of getting that credential attainment rate up. Really exciting, we saw that non-degree certificate pathways were associated with relatively high rates of employment and earnings compared to other community and technical college outcomes pathways. And then thinking about the qualitative work, we heard that for some students, college is just expected, but then there's this other group of students who are looking at a variety of different factors as they make their decisions. And then finally, for the interviewees, we heard a lot about informal sources of support and less about formal programs that exist. So these are all just things to think about. And before we actually get into the findings, just a few things to share. So we as a team, we're not making any causal claims with this. This project is meant to be descriptive, it's exploratory. It kind of sets the stage for more rigorous research. It kind of helps the state policymakers, advocates kind of identify what is going on, what does the landscape look like, and where might we want to dive a bit deeper. So just something to keep in mind. We're also not prescribing any particular pathway as the best. We think that every student is unique and that there are a variety of different pathways that can lead to successful outcomes. And then finally, our findings are still in the preliminary phase. So we're actually in the midst of doing some data fact checking in preparation for a series of public deliverables, such as briefs, reports that are going to be coming out over the coming months. So be on the lookout for those. And then just a disclaimer that we got the data from ERDC, and the views presented here do not necessarily represent their own. Okay, so I'm going to pause a second for questions. Let me just try to look at the chat. John, anything coming in?
Nope, you're good.
All right, so in that case, I'm going to pass it on to Annabelle.
Thanks, Brett. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the 12 pathways we identified through our cluster analysis and a couple of our takeaways. We go to the next slide. So first off, these are the 12 pathways that emerged from our cluster analysis. So these are the actual pathways that the graduating class of 2017 are following after graduation. And I know this looks like a lot. It's hard to digest, and that's because it is a lot. But you don't have to worry about reading each of these pathways right now or taking it all in right now. We're going to walk through each pathway in more detail in a minute. But for now, I want to direct your attention to the key at the bottom of this slide and quickly explain how to read each of these pathways. So each little box in each pathway represents a different kind of enrollment depending on the shade of green of the box. So we have high school, community or technical college, a four-year college or university, and then entry into the workforce. And so those are all different shades of green, getting darker as you go. And then we use little circles within each enrollment type within each of these little boxes to represent attainment of different kinds of credentials. So we have certificates, associate's degrees, and bachelor's degrees. And then finally, we have a few more symbols. There's a lightning bolt that represents that students are using dual credit to earn a credential at an accelerated rate. There's an hourglass symbol that indicates that the students are earning credentials later in the observation window. And then a dotted line around a box indicates that only some students engage in the activity or earn the credential that's reflected by that box. So the most prominent example of that is in pathway 12, that bottom right-hand pathway. There are several dotted lines indicating that not everyone in the pathway did all of these things. Okay, so those are kind of the basics. So now let's look at each of the pathways a little more closely. So our two largest pathways are the no college enrollment and the some college no credential pathways, which we call pathways 1 and 2. And in the first pathway, students go straight to the workforce after high school. In the second pathway, students go from high school to a CTC or four-year, and then on to the workforce without earning a credential. So both of these pathways include students who do not earn a credential within 6.5 years of graduating from high school. And it's notable that these are our two largest pathways. And then we also think it's especially important to keep an eye on pathway 2, the some college, no credential pathway, because some of these students are enrolling for several terms and yet not earning credentials. Next set of pathways. So these are pathways 3 to 7. And they capture people who are earning credentials at community or technical colleges. So for each of these pathways, the second box is the community or technical college box or enrollment. So in pathway 3, we have students who enroll in community and technical colleges and earn certificates while enrolled. In pathway 4, we have students who enroll at a CTC and earn both a certificate and an associate's degree. Pathway 5 is students who enroll at a CTC and earn only associate's degrees. Pathway 6 is students who attend CTCs and earn their associate's degrees, but at an accelerated pace because of their participation in dual credit programs. And then in pathway 7, students attend CTCs and earn associate's degrees, but on a longer time horizon. So it might just take them a few extra terms to complete that associate's degree versus the other pathways. So altogether, these pathways make up about 11% of the trajectories that students are following. And we think that this is an important group to focus on because we know nationally more students are enrolling in community colleges. Then we have 3 pathways where students attend four-year colleges and universities. So first is pathway 8, which is our third largest pathway. And these students attend four-year institutions and earn bachelor's degrees. And this is kind of what Britt alluded to at the beginning. This is kind of the pathway that we might think of as traditional, or kind of the story we've been sold about how post-secondary education usually goes. So that's pathway 8. And then in pathway 9, students earn an associate's degree while they're still in high school through dual credit, and then they earn a bachelor's degree from a four-year institution at a faster pace. And then in Pathway 10, students earn a bachelor's degree from a four-year institution with later completion than Pathways 8 and 9. So again, we might think of this group of pathways, this high school to a four-year institution to the workforce, as kind of traditional, but the fact that there are three pathways here indicates to us that even that trajectory has a lot of variation within it, and people aren't always just going straight to that four-year degree, or they might be finishing it more slowly or more quickly. So that's our high school to four-year group. And then our last kind of set of pathways are these two pathways that include a mix of CTC and four-year enrollments. And we call pathway 11 our CTC to four-year transfer pathway because students first attend a CTC and earn an associate's, and then they transfer to a four-year school and earn a bachelor's. And that's about 5% of our cohort. And then pathway 12 is the least traveled pathway, and it represents students who take one of several other different routes through post-secondary education. So many of them have complex journeys that shift between CTCs and four-year institutions. For example, some students on this pathway attend four-year institutions and then switch to CTCs. And then others might earn applied bachelor's degrees at CTCs. And many earn certificates that lead to associate's degrees that in turn lead to bachelor's degrees. So there's a lot of complexity within this last and smallest pathway 12. Okay, so on to our takeaways. So first, students in Washington are taking a variety of routes through post-secondary education and into the workforce. And this is, obvious based on the sheer number of pathways that we have. So some students are entering the workforce without credentials. Others are attending career or technical colleges and earning certificates or associate's degrees Others still are attending four-year colleges or universities and earning bachelor's degrees. And another portion are attending both CTCs and four-year institutions. And then participation in dual credit adds another dimension of complexity here because people are earning credentials at different paces.
I think there was a couple questions relative to classifications in some of the pathways. One was, how does the analysis treat people that are doing multiple things at once, such as working full-time while enrolled sporadically or enrolled part-time while also working part-time?
I can answer that, but I think I'll let Britt answer that because she has the history of that, our decision making there.
Yeah, I can start, Annabelle, and then maybe you can fill in anything that I miss. That's a really great question. So as Annabelle said, we actually tried several different iterations of the analyses. So there were some versions of our result set where we looked at work versus enrollment and looked at people who were working simultaneously. There were actually states that allowed for that. In the end, we decided to let education take precedent over workforce experience. So that means that in practice, if a person is doing both, they're going to get coded as either in a CTC or a four-year institution, depending on what they're doing. Similarly, if they for whatever reason are in both a CTC and four-year institution at the same time, the four-year institution is going to kind of be prioritized, so they'll be coded in that way. So we do see across pathways, because we do a lot of kind of like post hoc analyses, that a lot of people are working while they are enrolled. In fact, I think the majority of students are having at least some employment while they are enrolled. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure who asked.
I think it does. And
Okay.
then there was also a question about bachelor's degrees at the CTCs, where they fit in, were they maintained at the CTCs, or were those included in the 4 year if it's a bachelor degree through those?
Yeah, that's another great question. So those people will actually show up in that 12th pathway that Annabelle was describing. So the more um,
Okay.
unique and complex journeys. And so they're a relatively small group, but yes, we do see people getting those applied bachelors at the CTC, and they are in pathway 12.
Yeah. And I think the only other one that was question was out there was on, it says, so pathway 9 would be running start students. And I think that had dual credit, which would include running start.
Exactly. Yep. And in fact, it is mostly running start that we're seeing that people are participating in when they're in those kind of accelerated pathways. So there are some people doing like college and high school, and of course like AP, IB, but really when you think about the people who are getting their credentials really early, they are by and large participating in running start.
Well, thanks for letting me interject, but I thought these were all methodology questions. It would be good to get out of the way before we got into the findings.
Absolutely. Those are all great questions. Thanks, y'all. All right, Annabelle, I will turn back to you and then I'll go to the next takeaway.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had one more takeaway here for you all. So um, this is our second major takeaway is that to make progress toward its 70% credential attainment goal, Washington can focus attention on the 30% of students in Pathway 2, which is the pathway of those with some college but no credential. And I mentioned this earlier, but this is the most traveled pathway that was identified through our cluster analysis, which reflects the fact that while many students are finding their way to post-secondary enrollments, they might need more targeted support to ensure they're able to convert that enrollment to a credential, and then ultimately for Washington to achieve this goal. So that's our second takeaway. And we have a slide here for questions, but I know we just answered some. So if there are any others.
I think there was one more that popped into the chat while I was doing that that says, I may have missed this when you showed the 12 pathways, but I'm wondering if you identified pathways where students enter the workforce directly after graduating high school and later enroll in a post-secondary education, and B, are there pathways in which students are still enrolled in post-secondary education at the end of 6.5 year period?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. So, um, yes, we definitely see. I think for the first question, so there's one pathway that is completely separate where it's people who just enter the workforce, and then we don't see them enroll. And then for people who maybe have a period of being in the workforce and then later enrolling, they're going to be scattered throughout the other pathways depending on what type of institution they
Hmm.
enroll in and whether or not they got their credential, how long it took them to complete, etc. So yes, those people are showing up in the data. And then for your second question, also yes, we are seeing people who are still enrolled at the end of the 6.5 years, and they are in those two pathways that have like the later completion. So some of them are completing right at the end, and then others are just still enrolled at the end of 6.5 years. So, once we get additional data, we'll actually be able to see how much that rate goes up.
Yeah. And then just to clarify on the apprenticeships, which pathway are those in? Are those in CTCs?
Oh yeah, love that question. We actually some of our products have some like little snippets about apprenticeship. So apprenticeship people on registered apprenticeships, they're kind of showing up across a lot of different pathways, but the bulk of them are actually concentrated in that some college no credential pathway, interestingly. And so that's an area that we want to explore more. But yes. Um a lot of them are in the community technical college space, but then even in some of those four-year pathways, you do see people who are participating in apprenticeships.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I love these questions. They're really helpful for us, especially in thinking about how we can further clarify our work or new areas that we might want to explore. So please keep them coming. All right, so I will move on to look at labor market outcomes. So we've looked at a lot of different metrics to think about the labor market, and none of them are perfect. So there are lots of caveats for everything that we're showing here. The biggest is that we're using UI wage data, and so there are a lot of jobs that are just not going to be captured by this. So, for example, like gig employment, certain agricultural jobs, people who are in the military are, of course, not going to be represented. People who are engaged in caregiving, other informal labor, paid or unpaid, they're not going to be captured. So this is definitely undercounting employment. And also keep in mind, we're only getting information for people employed within Washington State. So when you think about some of these four-year institutions, for people who are leaving the state to attend those, some of them are going to be more likely to be employed out of state. So just think about when you're looking at those pathways that they're artificially kind of deflated. But all that in mind, we were really interested in these certificate pathways and just noting that the rates of stable employment, so that means the person was employed in each of quarters Q1 through Q4 in 2023 and earned over 14,000. Their rate for the two certificate pathways, so whether a person got a certificate by itself or they stat a certificate in an associate's degree, those two pathways have the highest rates of this stable employment. And so that was something that we thought was really interesting, especially as you see an increase in short-term credentials, including certificates. And then the second figure is looking at a range of earnings. So we start at the 25th percentile. We indicate the median with that white circle, and then we end at the 75th percentile. And this was done to kind of show, one, that for all these pathways, there's a wide range of earnings. So when you look at some of the four-year pathways, that range is quite substantial, sometimes approaching $40,000. And then for some of the some college no credential or the no college enrollment pathways, the range is a bit smaller because there's a bit of a ceiling effect probably going on. But either way, across all pathways, there's a wide range of earnings. And some of this is likely because of differences based on program of study. So we did do some preliminary analysis based on zip codes. And you can see, like, yes, there are definitely some programs of study that are on the higher end and some on the lower end. So that's for sure happening. Again, just a reminder that none of this is causal. We're not making any such claims. We're just looking at associations. So there likely is some selection going on as well. But that said, we're again excited for what we're seeing for those certificate pathways. So compared to associate's degrees, they are associated with higher earnings, and they're kind of falling right behind the four-year institutions that are indicated in that green color. So that's something that we especially were excited about on the research team, because one of our goals was to explore more in the community and technical college space, given that across the nation, we're seeing an increase in rates of enrollment in those types of institutions. Okay, so kind of already said most of this, but again, the relative to other CTC pathways, the certificate pathways have stronger short-term labor market outcomes. And that means it could be a good option for students who maybe for a variety of reasons, could be financial, could be responsibilities, are not able to complete a longer term credential program. And these shorter term programs might actually offer a better return on investment. But of course, more research is needed to understand one, which specific industries these certificates are leading to, and then also to what extent do these higher earnings continue on a longer time horizon? Okay. That went through that kind of fast, but are there any questions that came up for people?
Well, some of them have been answered in the chat, but I think one that just popped in, is there a way to account for time since graduation with any of these? I'm thinking of those with the certificate and pathway number 3 are closer to high school, and those that pursue the BA take a longer time.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Also something I should clarify. So for all the outcomes, we look at earnings and employment in that final year of data that we have. But that does mean that, like you're saying, that people who went into a certificate program right after high school, completed it in a year or so, they've been in the labor market for a lot longer than someone who maybe took
Mhm.
6.5 years, 6 years to complete their bachelor's degree program. So yes, that's another caveat to think about for sure.
And
Um, so
are all the certificates coming from the CTCs, or are there any four-year institutions providing certificates in this?
As far as I remember, they were all coming from the CTC space. Um, yeah, but if people have ideas or suggestions for that, we can explore that more. Okay. Any other questions?
I got one. This is Joy, and I'm used to saying that because I have deaf teammates, and so we always say this is our name. Sorry. But my question is, do you have any studies about students with disabilities and how they move through the the labor market or the credentialing? And that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. So the next phase of our analyses is actually going to get into specific subgroups of students.
Okay.
Um, so I'm so glad you brought that up, Joy. So students who have disabilities could be a subgroup that we look at and explore because we haven't like really fully determined what the subgroups are. So yeah, our next phase of analyses will kind of look at that more.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a more of a comment about the your apprenticeship and directly to the job market may have higher wages initially, but those are going to plateau over time as compared to somebody with an advanced degree that will have greater opportunities for promotion, advancement, and higher earnings at a later time that probably isn't incorporated in the study. Wasn't really a question, just a comment that I wanted to point out.
Yeah, appreciate that comment. And one thing that we have another phase of the project, and we're hoping to look at a slightly older cohort. So taking back the graduation year a few notches. Again, that's it's still going to be limited because it's still only so far you can look out, but at least that'll give us a few more years to see to what extent are those maybe early gains from apprenticeships or certificates kind of fizzling out or being sustained. But yeah, a really great point.
Good. I think we're caught up on questions.
Okay. All right. So in that case, I will pass it on to Betsy to talk about student perspectives.
Thank you, Britt. Hello, everyone. So to complement what we were seeing in the quantitative data and obtain more nuance about people's pathways and what influenced their decisions and experiences, the research team we interviewed 19 former Washington High School students. We're talking about 13 of them now. We did get 6 more. I saw a question come in the chat, why this number? We were aiming to interview 20 people, and in a first round we got 13, and we did the analysis based on that. That's what we're presenting, and I'll go in a little bit more to how we ended up getting our sample. Um, so this study did not have a captive pool of program participants, for example, like many MDRC studies. It's a lot easier to identify people to interview because we're looking at a program. In this case, because we were looking, across high school graduates, and there was no captive audience to recruit from, we used a kind of a wide net recruitment approach. We partnered with WASAC and recruited interview participants through trusted partners like school districts and nonprofit intermediaries. They forwarded an outreach message to eligible Washington High School alumni. This was people who began high school between 2007 and 2019. So they had an intended graduation year between 2011 and 2023. Even if they didn't graduate, that's who we targeted. So these messages went out. It had a link to a short web-based screener. Interested people could complete the screener, and then eligible respondents were invited to schedule an interview. And then we supplemented that recruitment method with a snowball referrals from interviewees. And surprisingly, that we ended up with a total of 19, 13 in the first round. You'll see their experiences following high school represented several of the 12 pathways that were surfaced through the quantitative analysis. So we'll see that in the next slide. 9 of the 13 individuals we spoke with attended a 4-year college or university soon after high school and earned a bachelor's degree. So that's due at least in part to the snowball sampling that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute. One interviewee earned an associate degree at a community college before transferring to a 4-year university and earning a bachelor's degree. Another interviewee experienced more of a non-linear pathway, transferring between 4-year and community colleges multiple times and eventually earning an associate degree. And finally, 2 interviewees went directly into the workforce after high school. So before we move on, I want to acknowledge the overrepresentation of the 4-year college group, but that provided an opportunity to understand the barriers and facilitators faced by people who earned a bachelor's degree, which, as we saw, is still the pathway that's associated with the highest earnings. So if helping more people earn a BA is a policy goal, then it's important to understand the experiences of people who achieved that milestone. So it actually worked out okay and was interesting for us to talk to those folks because, as we'll hear, even the path for some of them was not always immediately clear to them. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of factors driving decisions about post-high school plans, the interviewees were divided into 2 main groups. There were those for whom college was strongly expected, either by family, teachers, guidance counselors, or their social environment, and then those who did not have those strong external expectations. So we have one example, one interviewee who reflected on the college-going culture that was prevalent in their school, noted that their teachers, quote, didn't talk about anything other than college. My friends didn't talk about anything other than college, end quote. Other students highlighted familial and even regional expectations of going to college. So as you'll see on the slide, one person said, yeah, college wasn't a choice in my household. My entire family is from the East Coast, and over there, it's not are you going to school, it's where are you going to school. So people in the other group identified several other factors that they considered in making post-secondary education plans, including financial need, personal interests, or just uncertainty about college. Some prioritized earning money or gaining work experience. Others pursued technical or associate degrees as stepping stones, and one opted out of college entirely to build a career through freelance and hands-on learning. So our 4th takeaway, as we heard, is that some participants described college as essentially assumed. The question was where, not whether, while others described a more exploratory and practical process shaped by feasibility and real constraints that they faced. Moving on to perceptions of support and guidance. Across the interviews, people discussed relying on a mix of internal and external supports and guidance that help them obtain information and persevere through challenges. They were more likely to point to informal sources of support than to formal programs or structured services. That included their own resilience and initiative, figuring things out as they went along, as well as advice or encouragement from trusted adults like family members or mentors. Even guidance and support from school counselors and teachers was based on individual relationships in many cases or personal characteristics rather than received through more formal, structured support systems. Next slide. So interview participants described 4 key sources of support and guidance as being especially influential before and during their post-secondary decision making. So we see here the first 2, I'll call school-based adults and family. For 6 individuals, school-based adults like high school counselors, Gear Up advisors, or even college professors played a central role. What stood out here wasn't just the practical advice these adults provided, but also the important role that teachers or counselors played in expanding what felt possible for people. So one person we spoke with described their teacher saying, "You're perfectly capable of being able to excel in these classes. Don't limit yourself." We heard about this kind of encouragement, especially from students whose families didn't have college experience, where school-based adults became sometimes the primary or the only source of guidance, confidence building, and direction. We also heard from 5 individuals about the role of family support, and this ranged widely from explicit expectations to pursue higher education to more general emotional support, sometimes financial backing. Parents, grandparents, other relatives often acted as motivators or role models. In some cases, the support was pretty implicit, like the family set expectations but didn't offer specific career guidance. While in others, participants described very direct encouragement, reassurance about the path they were choosing. Next slide. And then 2 additional sources of support that came up were students' own initiative and peers. For 4 individuals, the story was essentially I had to become my own support system. They talked about developing self-advocacy, like figuring out who to ask, how to keep moving forward, even when there wasn't a clear roadmap for them. This came up especially also among first-generation students, where the burden of decision making and problem solving fell more heavily on them, the student. And then second, 3 individuals described peers as a practical and sometimes pivotal source of guidance. Friends helped translate the unwritten rules through word of mouth, like how to navigate an application process, where opportunities are, or what a particular path looks like in practice. And beyond providing information, the affinity groups and social circles that people talked about also helped build their confidence and skills. So peer support functioned as both navigation help, but also as encouragement. One thing I want to make clear is that the reliance on informal supports was not because they don't exist, but because they weren't always visible to the folks we spoke with, or they weren't accessible, or they weren't aligned with the moment when these students needed them. So that gap between what's available and what students actually experience is one important takeaway from the qualitative work that we did. Together, these qualitative findings highlight additional layers of complexity in this post-secondary journey that's already multifaceted and sometimes opaque. So students are not only choosing among a variety of options for continuing their education or their training beyond high school, but they're also having to do additional calculations to determine how each of these different potential routes fits within their own unique set of needs and characteristics. While some students were able to get information and support through their personal relationships and networks, others really could have used a roadmap that provides an overview of the post-secondary landscape and information on how to get to different destinations. So we concluded that students would benefit from more formal structural supports and just additional information on how to access them. These accounts suggest that when structured guidance isn't consistent or students don't know about it, the work of navigating shifts onto the students and their informal networks. I will hand it back to you, I think, Britt.
Okay, great.
I saw questions come in, but couldn't read them. So
So I think the main question came about of demographic data on the interviewees. Do you have that data, and was that part of the analysis?
we don't. We didn't. Well, actually, in the screener, I can't. I have to go back and see if we asked that. I don't think we did. I don't think we asked for that kind of demographic information.
Yeah, I think we have some like a few metrics, but it's pretty limited. Like I think we might have like race and gender, um, yeah, like a few
Okay.
things.
Now, one comment I'd like to make to everybody who's in the webinar with us is take a chance and scan through the chat, because there's been several resources that have been posted and additional studies that would align to this that I think are great information for you to get, and a lot of comments that I haven't been rereading. But people have made nice additions to the overall discussion in the chat.
Thank you. Okay. If no more questions, then just kind of bringing it all home. So always wanting to connect the research to policy and what's happening on the ground. In summary, um, even though we only looked at a few different aspects of people's post-secondary journeys, the data surfaced 12 distinct pathways. Um, and it's important that students, their parents, their teachers, guidance counselors, etc., have information about options that go beyond the normative or traditional pathway. Um, Second policy implication. So when we're thinking about the 30% of students who are in that some college, no credential pathway, there are some promising initiatives out there. One such option is reverse transfer programs. So that might increase credential attainment, because you may remember, as Annabelle pointed out, that a lot of these students are enrolling for multiple terms and might be close to getting a certificate or even associate's degree. And then a lot of you have mentioned or have had questions or comments about subgroups, and really thinking about for whom is a particular pathway working well. And so that's something that we're also interested in learning more about, specifically with certificate pathways. We are seeing some results that suggest that for some of our subgroups, there are higher participation rates in certificate pathways. And so that's something that we want to explore more in our next round of analyses. And then finally, as Betsy said, students are relying on informal forms of support when there are a lot of resources out there. So it's kind of a matter of how do we connect students to these resources and get them the information that they need. Okay. All right, so I'll stop for questions. We did have like some questions for you all, because we know there's a lot of great expertise in the audience. So yeah, but first, are there any questions that you all have for us?
If I could ask one question about the dual credit participation.
Yes, please.
A couple things strike me, and I know you're working with the data set you have. If our overall goal is to increase post-secondary credentials that lead to positive labor market outcomes, one thing I see is, acceleration isn't the goal, it's increasing more completions. And so, and also noting that in the labor market outcomes, those who completed faster through dual credit participation didn't have higher labor market outcomes. So I think it's really important for us to see how does dual credit participation help those who otherwise wouldn't complete. That's actually the goal of, statewide goal of increase post-secondary credentials. And I'm just wrestling with how often dual credit is pitched as save some money, get it done faster. And so I'm concerned about, what is the purpose or goal behind pretty large scale dual credit efforts. It's kind of a discussion, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. That's a really thoughtful question.
And so if there's any possible way in your future analysis to try to identify, does the impact of dual credit participation help, comparable students who otherwise don't participate complete more than others? I know that might be tricky with what you're working with, but I think that's a pretty critical question.
Yeah, no, I love that. That almost sounds like that could be a whole entire project. Yeah, thank you. All right.
We've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay. Well, in that case, if it's okay with you all, we'll throw out one of our question prompts. So, uh, one question we had, given everything that the team has pointed out, does anyone have ideas for strategies that high schools could implement to try to improve equitable access to information about the variety of options out there? And then what do you think would be required for these strategies to be successful? So, um, we know that there is a lot going on, and so there might be programs or initiatives that you all are seeing in your work that you think are promising and good ways to get more information to students. So really just wanting to hear from you all if you have any ideas or if there's anything that you're seeing that's working really well or yeah, has some potential.
Well, I think I'll give a shout out to the Mount Baker School District and the high school there. I was at a Limitless convening, which is a high school post-secondary transition effort that's being funded by the Gates Foundation along with Horizons. But I was at their convening about 2 weeks ago. They did a presentation on what they call pride presentations. So every student has to do a 10-minute presentation directly aligned to their high school and beyond plan and what they're doing after high school. And so in the last quarter of their senior year, they have to show evidence that they've analyzed the finances of their decision, they've applied, been accepted to a college, they've applied or been accepted to a job or a trade school. They have to make some sort of a conscious decision and prove that they've taken the steps necessary to be able to move on after high school and to enter that within the next 2 to 3 months following graduation. And to me, it's a great way of acknowledging the multiple pathways, but really forcing kids to say, you've got to make a choice. You can't just graduate and not know what you're going to do.
That was really cool. And you said that was what school district?
Mount Baker School District up near Bellingham.
Nice.
Anyone else?
I'll I'll add one thing I think your data shows really clearly, and others do too, is for high schools to focus just on enrollment as a success is really not good enough. It's persistence and completion. And I think your data that showed particularly the labor market outcomes for those with some college looked identical to those with no college. And I know there's a wide spread in that, but getting them in the door isn't enough.
Exactly. Yeah. And we actually have a brief that's coming out specifically for that group, for that pathway, to kind of explore exactly what you're saying in more detail. Thanks, Dan.
Well, as we're winding down, Britt, Betsy, Annabelle, David, I want to thank you for being with us today, for sharing the study and the insights that you've generated. This directly aligns with the work that WERA is trying to support, and it was very eye-opening and a great presentation. As I was listening, it reminded me of back in about 2017, Governor Inslee created a college to career task force and sent a group over to Switzerland to study the Swiss model of education and came back. And following that, I had a discussion with one of the members of the task force that started describing the multiple pathway options that they have designed within their system. And that became the essence of the high school graduation pathway bill that was passed in the 2019 legislative session, came about from that Swiss model. And your pathways that you've defined, to me, they not only define, but they legitimize the pathways that our students are taking into their futures that we need to be able to plan for in order to adequately support each and every student to reach their dreams into the future. So thank you again for being here today, for presenting your study. We're excited to be able to have you here. And for everybody else who's on the webinar, I just want to remind you the conference is coming up in December. The request for proposals is out, so go to the website, submit your proposals for conference sessions or pre-conference sessions. And again, thank you for being here, and everybody have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.